Good evening and welcome to the monthly meeting of the Burlington Electric Commission. It's held at 585 Pine Street every our second Wednesday of the month. We're here, 5:30. That might change. That probably will change next month to 5 p.m. So welcome. As always, public is welcome here. Come on down, join the conversation, give us your thoughts. It's an open meeting to express and have a good conversation. So anyway, we're going to start off tonight. First item on the agenda is the agenda. Do we have any changes, additions, subtractions to the agenda this evening?
Nope.
All right, hearing none. We'll move on to the minutes of the January 10th, 2024 meeting. Minus any clerical errors or typos or anything, are there any substantive changes to the minutes of January 10th?
I don't know.
Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
Make the motion to approve the minutes of December 13, 2023 meeting.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and seconded. Discussion on the motion. Hearing none. All those in favor of accepting the minutes of January 10th indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Chair says aye. All those
Commissioner
opposed?
Vaughn, you abstain, right? You weren't here.
Oh,
Oh, right.
I abstain.
And that's okay. I mean, if you've read
Thank you,
them.
Laura.
Okay.
I didn't, but
So we have 4 ayes, 1 abstention. Motion passes. Which will bring us to item number 3 on our agenda tonight, which is the public forum. This is a chance for anyone out there here at the building or out there on Zoom land to address the board with any concerns or whatever's on your mind. Is there anybody either in the public here or online that would like to speak? Sir.
I'll speak if, yeah.
You're here, right?
May as well.
Yeah, step up, yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thanks. I don't know if
You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah,
It's not a PA, it's just a recording.
right. It's kind of funny. Oh, it's just for that. Yeah, I'm Chris Gish. I am a Burlington resident and ratepayer. This is the first Burlington Electric Commission meeting I've been able to make. I've tried to review the minutes on some of the other ones. Largely because I've spent the last few years learning more about the McNeil plant and have a lot of concerns with that, just being a young person and like watching our climate kind of disintegrate before our eyes. You know, we all sort of know that, like the ridiculous weather we're having this winter, really warm, and then now like this little bubble of cold air coming down from the north as further below us gets snow further south because it's like a supercharged El Nino, and the Pacific Ocean is, 4+ degrees warmer than previous El Ninos even, which is when the Pacific Ocean is warmer. All kinds of things. Like, we could talk about the climate for a long time. But I know I can't necessarily directly ask questions of the commission, but I guess I want to flag what, in my sense, has been no serious consideration from Burlington Electric on how to phase out the McNeil plant or how to do that in a timely way. And I'm not sure if you all have clarity on the necessity of moving off of like carbon-based energy sources. But I think the science is pretty clear on that. I think it was pretty telling when even one of the authors of this previous memo by VEIC that Burlington Electric had explaining like the so-called carbon neutrality of McNeil, even one of those authors in like a front porch forum exchange with some of us, he remarked that we should be shifting away from all carbon-based fuels as quickly as we can. And in short, I want to just kind of ask the commission how Burlington Electric is starting to move to do that and to think like concretely how to do that. Because I've noticed like in the IRP, the draft IRP, there's not really any consideration of using McNeil less. And I know, and Burlington Electric is pursuing the district energy, which is a 20-year contract that implies McNeil would be operating, at a similar capacity, at least during the winter. And then I think Darren is also going to talk to you tonight about the res bill that Burlington Electric is active in the State House, and that basically grandfathers in McNeil and our other biomass facility indefinitely to qualify for RECs, which doesn't seem right to me if you understand the res similar to me, which is to try to get a handle on climate change and reduce climate pollution. So all those things kind of, which I'm sure like you're aware of at a lot of levels, I just want to flag and ask you all what you're doing to like seriously and concretely think about how we can phase out the McNeil plant. And maybe that's a study, maybe that's trying to think about how Burlington Electric can use all of its connections and, you know, power at the state level to try to make it easier to develop new wind and solar and like more funds toward energy conservation, things like that, like things that could actually help us move away from McNeil. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about tonight, and hope that makes sense for you all.
Absolutely. I would give Darren a crack at that if you.
Well, I'll just say, I think we've emailed a little bit. Their district energy resolution has a number of concrete steps in it that we're pursuing that talk about how to improve efficiency at McNeil, how, where possible, reduce any sort of environmental footprint at McNeil. But, you know, I challenge anybody to think about if we want to have 100% renewable electricity and we want to have 100% or as close to it reliability as we can have, and we know that winter energy is incredibly volatile, expensive, and heavily fossil fuel dependent, I don't know how you get there with today's grid with wind and solar. Now, the good thing about the Renewable Energy Standard Bill that we're working on in a coalition with VPIRG and VNRC and Renewable Energy Vermont, other utilities, is we're making a commitment within that bill to say that as our load grows from today, as we electrify more things, which is part of our plan, we're going to meet an increasing portion of that with what is called under the bill new renewables. So renewables that are primarily wind and solar that are built post 2010. So things that have come online more recently, including wind in Vermont, which we're very supportive of, and the state is currently not supportive of building any sort of wind in Vermont. We are supportive of wind in the region and in Vermont. So the idea is let's build out more wind and solar to meet our growing load. But I challenge anybody to figure out how you can run the grid reliably, respect ratepayers' affordability, run with 100% renewable electricity, so no nuclear, no fossil fuels in our mix, and do so without wood, and in today's current technology state. The district energy resolution has a lot of pieces about doing some analysis. We have that as part of our plan, so we're interested in the analysis, but part of our role here is to be pragmatic about providing power. Our customers' number one concern every single time we survey is reliability, more than affordability, more than anything else. And my view has always been that if we want to electrify, which is good for the climate, more EVs, more heat pumps, people need to know that they are going to have reliable, affordable power. And as of right now, McNeil's part of that equation for us. Could be that in 20 years, there's different technology mix and we're in a position to move away from it. And if moving away from McNeil meant we were relying more on wind and solar, I'd be really interested in that conversation too. But currently, as the VEIC report pointed out, 92 to 98% of the time we run McNeil, the alternative on the grid is natural gas. And much of the rest of the time it's coal and oil. So it doesn't seem responsible to me to move away from McNeil and towards those resources. That's just kind of our philosophy at the moment, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that is.
And where do you find, you know, to his point, 50 megawatts of reliable power that you can turn on with basically a flick of a switch? How are you going to replace that right now, today?
Mm-hmm. No, I don't think we're going to today, and I don't want to have like, you know, an extended back and forth, especially after like coming right here from work and all that. But I just think the level of study or like serious consideration that I see from Burlington Electric about like how do we phase out this generating station that is like highly polluting to the climate and is not nearly as detailed and highly considered as like other things that are being planned. And I think 20 years is way too late to be like entertaining the notion of maybe starting to phase it out. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I'm not an expert on the grid, so I can't comment on like, oh, it would actually be impossible or not. But all those things, and like thinking maybe more seriously about reducing our electricity use, because right now I know the projections are through 2050 to roughly double Vermont's electricity use, and it seems pretty daunting to think of that all coming from wind and solar. I would agree with that. So I think wrapping our heads like more seriously around all those things, start
Yeah,
with.
it goes back to my same question, what do you phase it out to?
Mhm.
That's the $100,000 pyramid question.
Yeah.
What
offer
direction do you go, right?
one other thought, just because you mentioned it. We don't believe that McNeil is a bigger climate polluter than fossil fuels. And I know there's a distinction here, and I know that not everyone thinks that. But the analysis shows that when you're using wood residue, that's the dominant fuel source that we use, leftover tops, limbs, disease, damaged trees that are otherwise going to decompose or are part of a sustainable forestry operation, that the carbon value from that, the payback on that, is far, far quicker than if you were going out and cutting trees for the purpose of generating energy. And I would agree that you could do biomass very poorly and create a really negative carbon impact from that. And I would argue conversely, you could have a situation where forestry operations that are happening anyway and generating leftover wood that's not commercial and can't be used has a different carbon footprint. And there's a lot of nuance to that discussion. So I don't think it's as simple as saying that it has emissions at the stack, or that we can only look at emissions at the stack kind of one point in time. The state and all the kind of analysis that I see looks at a life cycle. We do that with EVs, we do it with solar. Solar has a carbon footprint too that it has to pay off over a period of time, so does wind. With McNeil, we have to consider the fuel source. And that's another piece that's in the district energy resolution, is to have a review of the wood supply, independent review that we're gonna have, third-party review, to confirm the data that we have that says that the bulk of our wood is coming as essentially leftover residue from forestry operations that are taking place in the state of Vermont, New York, which has, again, a really different carbon footprint life cycle than it would if you were going out and cutting trees or for the purpose of generating energy. That happens in some places, like in southern US. If you're growing trees for the specific purpose of cutting them down and shipping them overseas to use for energy, very, very different carbon footprint from the analysis I've seen than what we do at McNeil. And I respect that there are different viewpoints. You have a different viewpoint. I respect that. I just want to offer it as context.
Cool. Yeah, I appreciate that. I am really curious to see that study and hopefully see the process and who's doing that third-party study and all that. I've looked at that too and visited some sites where wood from McNeil was harvested, but it's hard to, I don't think, from what I know of, there's not a paper trail of like what types of wood exactly go to McNeil. There's the harvest notifications that are approved by the State Fish and Wildlife Department, but all they're saying is like some wood was harvested for McNeil from this site, but some wood could have gone somewhere else as well. But it doesn't, like the tonnage or type of wood is not specified. So I think it's hard to have any confidence in knowing that these are all, maybe they're residues, but it's hard to know that they're all really limbs and tops. I don't know that there's really much documentation on that, or if you can share if there is.
Yeah, I mean, we've updated our contractual materials last year to make it crystal clear in our appendix. We will not accept energy generation, wood feedstock. Like nobody can go and cut at a site specifically to serve us, and that we will only accept the non-commercial wood. So the leftover residues, tops and limbs, disease, damaged trees, wood that's left over from a otherwise, purposeful harvest. And we also don't pay enough to make it worth anyone's while to go in the woods and cut specifically for us. So, the third-party review I think will be helpful for you because you'll get to have additional data on how that looks. We have a study out from a different third-party INRS for 2023 that did some analysis on this, but we'll have a different study. And, we have 4 foresters on staff who are professionally trained and work with the state of Vermont agencies to make sure that we're meeting all the appropriate criteria. So, I'm not aware of any kind of further concern around it, but I think putting out more information will be useful to you and anyone else who has a concern.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's good to know. I know I have concretely talked to foresters and landowners who said that foresters recommend they cut down like live trees or whole stands of live trees and send them to McNeil, and they probably qualify as like damaged or something because they're not high quality for other uses. Like if anyone's familiar with like pasture pines, like white pines that grow up after an old pasture, like they're weevilled, they have multiple stems, but they're healthy, they'll keep growing, but they're like low quality. So things like that, like I know I've heard foresters recommend like, oh yeah, you should get these chipped and sent to McNeil or Rygate. So things like that. But yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. But yeah.
Thanks for your comments.
Yeah,
Al.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking the
Thanks
time
for-
to come down here tonight. We appreciate it. Is there anyone else for public comment? Is there anyone online? I know Alan's here for a specific subject, so. Anyone online? Lori?
No.
No,
No.
I'm sorry, no.
All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the Commissioner's Corner, an opportunity for commissioners to share what's on their mind or things that have happened over the last month or so, and open the floor to commissioners.
I'm good.
Nothing? All right. Easy enough. We'll move on to item number 5 on our agenda. That's the General Manager update with General Manager Springer.
All right, thank you. So we're moving towards springtime, set of announcements on our updated incentives. We're holding things steady essentially till then, but we're working towards a variety of updates, some exciting announcements, I think, coming in April, and all coinciding with the 2023 net zero roadmap data that Synapse is working to put together for us. So we'll hopefully have that ready to roll out all in April, and we'll keep the commission updated as we kind of get a firm sense of the timing of that. But don't anticipate anything happening in March, so certainly not before our next meeting. I think we touched on the renewable energy standard. So this bill is now out of the House Energy Environment Committee, was in the House Ways and Means Committee today. We testified in House Energy and Environment. We haven't been asked to testify in Ways and Means. I don't think Ways and Means is taking a look at it for policy purposes, but just fiscal purposes. It may have to go to the appropriations, and then it would go to the full floor, and it's been supported strongly by VNRC, VPIRG, Renewable Energy Vermont, Conservation Law Foundation, others, as well as a number of utilities. I think it's an interesting example of a really kind of broad collaborative approach on a topic that's eluded consensus for a period of time. And the original bill was from 2015. I worked on it when I was in state government, the first version. That's held steady for about 9 years, but it's due for an update. I think we have a good update that's planned. And BED will continue to be active trying to support it moving through. The Energy Assistance Program, which you all voted to send to the council and the council approved, is under review at the PUC. We're working through potential questions that may come up in that process. I don't expect any kind of immediate result there, but the good news is that the pilot program, again, is for the 12.5% discount for income qualified customers. The pilot is essentially extended until we reach a conclusion at the PUC. So customers will not be impacted by the regulatory process. Monday, so 2 days ago, we had another vote on a carbon ballot item. There was a vote at the last council meeting, a vote at this meeting. Both votes were 6-6. So there's not going to be a ballot item in March or one planned for August. We're continuing to be interested in working with the existing ordinance and making sure it's implemented well, but also exploring options for buildings that are not currently regulated by that ordinance. So all new constructions under that ordinance, all buildings 50,000 square feet and larger are under that ordinance. It's still not 100% clear to me that the carbon fee is the right tool to help decarbonize the smaller commercial buildings. It's something we'd like to explore. There are definitely organizations we work with that are going to share best practices with us from around the country. There are building performance standards. There's energy disclosure rules and requirements. There's energy efficiency standards. There's different ways to structure incentive programs. So there's more than one way to attack this issue. And we've looked really hard at the cohort of buildings that's 25,000 to 49,999 square feet. And it's a different cohort than the 50,000 and above. 50 and above, largely campuses like UVM Medical, Champlain, the school district, the city, larger kind of capital planning organizations by and large. If you go below to that next cohort, those entities still have buildings, the district, the city, UVM Medical, UVM, Champlain, but you get a whole bunch of other buildings types, and we're talking about social service providers, nonprofits, nursing homes, coffee shops. These are not necessarily entities that even necessarily own or control their building in some cases, and if they do, they may not be thinking about capital planning the same way that a larger institution is. So the carbon fee is a good tool to affect the capital planning on equipment replacement. We have to figure out if it makes sense for that or a different tool to apply for the next cohort of buildings, and we're going to explore that topic. We're interested in exploring that topic. So more to come hopefully there. Our charter change pending in just a couple weeks on the town meeting day ballot. Emily was at the Ward 2-3 MPA to answer questions and also did a segment on WCAX. We have a website, line of credit FAQ on the website. The link is here. Feel free to share with any members of the public who might be interested, or if you want to post it on Front Porch Forum or anything like that. It's available. This is fairly straightforward, going from 5 to 10 million after not having increased it for a lengthy period of time with inflation being what it is. And all things equal, it's good for us from a financial metrics standpoint with our credit rating. It's also good for our ratepayers because then we don't have to raise the same level of cash to keep on hand if the credit line can count towards a portion of our requirement. So we're hopeful that that'll be we'll continue to get information out about it, and that that'll be an item that can move forward. If it does move forward on town meeting day, we'll work to advance it in the legislative process, see if there's an opportunity to move on it this year. And then last but not least, if you're a fan of BED social media, which I hope you all follow, 2 F-150 Lightnings just joined our fleet. One's at McNeil and one is here at Pine Street. It's been really great to see the continued electrification of our fleet. Obviously, we've got the electric bucket truck, which is a whole different type of vehicle to electrify, but we're increasingly able to replace fossil fuel trucks with electric trucks, and that are going to have the range, all-wheel drive, the capacity to do all the things that we need them to do. That's an exciting opportunity. We're going to keep planning for that in our budget. I really don't see any need to buy another, gasoline vehicle for conventional purposes. If we can at all avoid it, we're going to avoid it. I think with our line trucks, we're going to explore how the electric truck works. We might be interested in trying to get another electric truck if we're able to, grant funding dependent potentially, and look at also some different hybrid options as well that might evolve in that space. But I think we're getting to a tipping point where there may be enough options out there that we don't look at purchasing gasoline vehicles anymore, and certainly our preference not to do that. So,
Do we still have gasoline line trucks out there?
we do. So the orange line trucks are hybrid line trucks. Some of them may run on biodiesel or are capable of running on biodiesel, but they're hybrid, but they're using more conventional fuel. They're not fully electrified. So the electric bucket is the first, it has some limitation in terms of you'd have trouble if you were trying to take it to a mutual aid in southern Vermont or Massachusetts without adequate charging infrastructure, because it's not going to have the range to really get there all in one shot. So either we will need, we could get another one potentially, because you use them around the city, not an issue for the most part, I think, but we're going to need some sort of hybrid capabilities for vehicles that are going to go potentially outside the city during storms and things like that. So it's an active interest of ours, but we're glad to welcome the Lightnings for the time being, and we'll keep working towards more electrification. Good. That's what I've got.
Any questions?
So I have one, on the carbon fee, is there a transportation element of that?
Not
I feel like
really.
I've asked that before, but yeah.
Yeah, not really. So it's very much building based. The only place where maybe transportation would come into play is if you're an existing building and you pay the fee, and you're in Burlington, you could propose a plan to help reduce emissions on your site and get a portion of the fee returned to you. So it's conceivable that that could be something that was transportation based at your building, whether that's replacing like lawn equipment with electric lawn equipment, or doing it would be doing things outside of the scope of the thermal sector potentially in that space. But by and large, it's a thermal focused fee.
But I think you said last time, like if somebody bought bus passes for everybody who worked there, for example, that they could take that cost and offset it with their fee?
Yeah, it's conceivable if they had to pay the fee and they submitted a plan that was approved, And if it was a transit-based plan or a transportation demand management plan, I think that that would fit. I mean, we haven't had a real-world
Yeah,
example,
yeah,
because
yeah.
I don't know that we've even had like a permit go through yet, because it's only been in effect for a month and a half. But yeah, if you were a campus-based system and you had to pay the fee, and you wanted to get a portion of it back, those are the types of things that you might do to try to reduce emissions and could propose, I think. As far as I understand the language, I think that would be acceptable. Ultimately, the Department of Permitting administers it, but yeah, that could be an element.
Other questions? Yeah, no? All right, thank you. All right, we'll move on to item number 6 on our agenda, the December FY24 financials.
It's a lot of red
Not on the balance sheet.
on the table.
Good blood of our enemies.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Here are the financial results for December FY24. We had a net loss in December of $203,000 compared to a budgeted net loss of $76,000. So it's we had a budgeted net loss of $279,000 compared to I'll try to, third time, okay. Actual net loss of $279,000 compared to a budgeted net loss of $76,000. Variance of $203,000 worse than budget. Contributing factors, sales to customers were down compared to budget in December. It was warmer than we had forecast or than average temperatures would have indicated. So both residential and commercial sales were down. Other revenues were also down by $109,000. $103,000 of that is EEU reimbursements. Moving to operating expenses, net power supply expense had a negative variance of $325,000. As always, lots of components to net power supply expense. Fuel expense was favorable to budget by $393,000. McNeil production was 47% lower than we had budgeted. Similar story as November. Lower energy prices, unfavorable economics, still a little muddy in the woods at the beginning of the month, so we were trying to conserve wood supply for hopefully colder weather ahead. So McNeil ran less than we had planned for it to run, so we saved on fuel. Transmission expense was unfavorable by only $17,000. November peak loads were higher than budget. Purchase power was the second biggest variable. Overall purchase power was $700,000 worse than budget. Combination of things there. We saved a little bit on the Mystic capacity, but because we had less wind production and we had McNeil offline more than budgeted, that means we paid more for energy through the ISO exchange. So, and also energy prices were lower, so we brought in $981,000 less revenue from the sale of excess energy. So when I talked last month about the projections for the forecast and the sort of overall $2 million projection in purchase power, we saw a significant part of that here in December. Other operations and maintenance expense was better than budget, actually, by $242,000 for the month. Looking at the year, that category is about $500,000 better than budget. And other income below the line, other income and deductions, had a positive variance of $97,000, most of that unrealized gain on investment. So for the year to date, we're at a net income of $2.3 million. We had budgeted to be at $402,000 at this point, so we're 1.9 better than budget. Last month, we were $2.1 million better than budget, so the sort of year-to-date results have eroded a little bit. Speaking to the forecast, as I did last month, not a lot has changed. The forecast has improved a little bit. We've sort of internalized some of the, energy market hit that we were expecting. Rec revenue, we've, since calendar 23 is over, now we know our rec's available, so we know what rec revenues. We're anticipating on the order of like $1.4 million in additional net power supply expense due to lower energy prices between now and June. So combined, we're at the moment projecting a net loss of $1 million. A month ago, we were looking at 1.5, so it's improved. And we've identified a few areas that we're actively working on, and when we do the forecast next month, we'll be trying to improve even further on that. So any questions on the income statement before I move to the next page?
Yeah, I think so, because I'm not really sure I'm understanding what's happening. It sounds, so you did your budget, and it looks like for the whole budget for the year is okay. It's just these months? But you're also thinking, when you get to the end of the fiscal year, we're gonna be behind.
Right. Yeah, it's a situation where we had a month or two of negative variance kind of this fall, but the variance was small. And then we had several months where we did better than budget, right?
Right.
But now we're coming into the winter, December, January, February. Those are the big, winter excess energy producing months. And so that's where we have the most risk in terms of what will the energy prices be? What will we receive for the sale of that excess winter energy? And so it's the situation where we can be kind of $2 million better to the good, but then lose $4 million in the course of 3 months, if you know what I mean.
Right, so you're counting on the sale of energy as part of the income.
It's an offset to power supply expense. That's kind of why power supply expense is labeled net. So the revenue we receive from that energy kind of gets rolled up into that expense line. But that total expense line is really a sum of about 15 or more different elements, right? Some of which are cost, and this one, if we had energy to sell, right, it would be a revenue, essentially. So it's why it's called net expense.
But like one of the takeaways that I had looking at this, you're halfway through, and if you were ending the year right there, really good variance to net income. January, February are gonna be the months where most of that risk is gonna materialize. So we're waiting to get the January financials to see, we know power prices in January were not where they were when we did our budget and our rate case back in May and June of 2023. Like, we know there's a delta there that's in our forecast. How it played out in real time and what it looks like, you're gonna start to see in January and February. And then there are some other factors like the reduced rec sale revenues that aren't kind of factored in here yet, but we factored them into the forecast. So there's still like a lot of dynamism over, 5+ month period where things could shake out in different ways. And we may end up right on track for what we planned budget-wise, even if we get there a completely different way than we expected, or we could face some headwinds. And that's what we are kind of working on, month to month right now.
And it seems like it's just so many things that are out of control, of BED's control. Like last year, the problem was the price,
Same problem.
It's the same problem.
But different
price.
magnitude
Yeah.
this year, because we were more conservative.
Different magnitude, same problem.
Okay.
Yeah,
We
we were more
expect energy to
conservative.
sell at a certain level and it comes in lower than that.
Right.
And so that space is smaller than
Yeah,
we had
exactly.
budgeted.
So we were more conservative in the price we forecast, but we still have roughly the same volume of excess energy. The ISO markets work, we get charged for all of our load, and against that we net all the payments for our generation. So that's why we call it net purchase power. And when we have excess purchase power, energy charges could theoretically go negative. But, that's a function of the projected price, and the projected price has not come in the last 2 winters. Now that excess position will also change with the expiration of contracts and if we choose to renew them at lower volumes and things like that. The excess was generally created by signing the contracts before COVID and having sales still not have recovered to pre-COVID levels.
Another way that the excess could get shrunk, right? If the load increases compared to the contracts we have, right?
you'd
Then
sell
we
to
have
somebody-
less, then we're less, have a less extra, we're less long,
To sell on the open market, you
Right.
sell to your customers.
right?
We did,
right.
right, we did not intend to be, this long in winter periods, but the contracts were let before the sales fell off. Now, when they expire, we do not have to replace them at full volume. So we can tailor our position again. Now, we would normally be excess. That's not an atypical position for us because to be 100% renewable reliably, where there's extra buffer to cover intermittent resources underproducing in a year, but not this much. So we would normally scale back one or more of our replacements to recognize this if the load has not recovered by the time we're replacing them.
You would agree to produce less power and you'd be better matched with what you need.
We would purchase less.
Purchase less,
Okay.
yeah.
And then be not sitting on as much excess, which then removes some of the volatility in the projection on our budget.
You can't count on the.
It doesn't, we're not paying more for the contracts than the contracts are worth. But in a budgeting process, we are not getting the budgeted revenues. We're not losing money on these power contracts, but we are not making the budgeted amounts.
You're counting on the money to pay your bills.
In a budget sense, yes.
Right. Crystal ball's not working well.
It's a little bit, well, I think it's, so COVID is part of the problem, plus climate and regional energy prices, a lot of things.
But I think we'll know more after the January and February financials shake out, relative to what we do now. We'll have a little more precision on where we are.
Because operating expenses, that's in control.
Yes. No, it's the power supply line that's the variable,
And the
and it's this time of
revenue.
year that it's the variable.
Right.
Is supply chain on more additional electrification still a challenge for increasing that base load, or is that noise?
Supply chain?
Yeah, just getting more, like what your projections were for increasing electrification and bigger usage.
Kind of like two issues there. One is we're definitely still having a longer lead time to get items in, which I think could be an issue with, as we come to the end of the revenue bond period, which we're going to, making sure we can get stuff in and pay for it with the revenue bond before that expires. But then we're seeing a lot of electrification happening, but it is not at a volume that has started to creep fully out of the noise of variability. And I think as we've talked about, a lot of it's happening in the residential sector, which is only 25% of our revenue and energy use, essentially. And the commercial sector, which is the bulk of our energy use, we haven't seen that level of approach yet, and that's one of the challenges.
Yeah, I'd say that the sort of general economic condition, right, of Burlington, in particular of the businesses in Burlington and the commercial property owners in Burlington, is a big driver of the level of investment they're willing to make, in building new construction that will now need to be electrified or pay a carbon fee under the new ordinance, or, retrofit, upgraded, weatherized, et cetera. So our energy services group is seeing an uptick in that activity, but really only, I would say, in the past 6 to 9 months, and that's, so this sort of COVID hangover in terms of commercial building investment has been longer than what we've seen in terms of consumer residential adoption of electrification.
It's complicated.
Yeah. Shall I move to the next page? Okay. Okay, moving to capital spending for December year to date. We've spent 28% of the budget for the year. We have budgeted to have spent 4.7 million at this point. We have only spent 3.1 million so far. A lot of the generation, the production spending will take place in April with a McNeil outage for annual maintenance and investment there. Distribution has a lot of work scheduled for spring. They've been working hard on, tracking materials, wire, switches, transformers, et cetera, and moving projects around as material availability allows. Let's see, for cash position, we had $8.075 million of operating cash available at the end of December. That compares to a budgeted value of $7.5 million, so still about $500,000 better than budget for cash. And you can see the credit rating metrics there for the last 12 months ended 4.58% on the debt service coverage ratio set by the revenue bond resolution, adjusted debt service coverage ratio of 1.45, and 110 days cash on hand.
Questions? Okay. Any more on that from you, Emily? Okay, we'll move on to item number 7, which is, it's the Emily show for the rest of the meeting here.
I'm afraid so.
The BD budget overview.
Okay. Just get these. Okay, that's good. That worked. Excellent. Okay. Right. So I think this will get to actually it's a good segue from the discussion we just had and some of Commissioner Whitaker's questions. So I wanted to, the basis of this is a presentation I gave to BED employees last summer, just kind of a budget 101. And I thought it would be useful for particularly some of the newer commissioners. Sorry, I'm gonna figure out how to advance my slides. There we go. So pretty simple. We'll just go through a lot of pictures, but personally I find it a lot more useful to look at numbers in terms of proportions and change over time. So this is a picture of our FY24 operating revenue budget. So this is a budget we're working off of through this year. And the question I asked to the employees, total operating revenue budget of $65.1 million, what is the big obvious thing about this slide? And the big obvious thing is that 81% comes from sales to customers, right? So that's how important sales are, to our operating revenues. We talk a lot about rec revenues because they, like sales, they are volatile and they are an important component, but they're only 13% of this year's budget. Miscellaneous revenues is where the miscellaneous fees that we'll be talking about later, that's where that piece falls. Conduit rental falls in that. EEU reimbursement falls into that slice. And actually, of that miscellaneous revenues, 3.8 million, 3.4% of that is EEU reimbursement, which also appears in operating expenses, so the two kind of net against each other. So there's really only a very small slice of that that's sort of true BED operations. Okay, so these are megawatt hour sales over the last 20 odd years. And so when James was talking about negotiating contracts in the sort of 2012 to 2016 period, right, you can see where sales were. around 330,000 megawatt hours. And then you can see COVID here in 2020. And they've recovered a little bit, but they're definitely not where they were when we negotiated the sort of the last of the renewable contracts. Some other things that you can see in this slide. Sorry, I have to go back to another screen to see my notes. Around 2001, there was a recession. You can kind of see the recession at the very beginning. 2005, the hospital had a big expansion. That's the highest point of the graph. Another recession, 2008, 2009. 2010, the federal government put in new efficiency standards for lighting, such that you could no longer go to a hardware store and buy an incandescent light bulb, for example. Starting those standards started to phase in. So all of those things had kind of a noticeable effect on sales. And then we also had, 2017, you can see Blodgett left Burlington for Essex, right? So things like Blodgett, Burlington Town Center, Specialty Filaments, right? Coffee Cup, all of those business relocations or closures show up here in the kilowatt hour sales. So that's one of our big challenges, right? Obviously, when we're trying to look at a budget that's faced with inflation, kind of 81% of your revenues, right, have been
So one
softly
question.
declining, yes.
Laura just asked if the strategic
Mm-hmm.
electrification efforts are driving, like, it seems like if Blodgett's gonna have, you can see Blodgett leaving or Coffee Cup leaving, that some of the strategic electrification should show up as well, but.
And
you're
that's
saying no.
exactly the point about the commercial buildings, right?
Okay.
So, yes, EV rebates, heat pump rebates have been strong and excellent, right? But the per kilowatt addition of those is dwarfed by the 75% of those kilowatt hour sales that come from the commercial sector. So what we really need are more hulas with geothermal, heating and cooling systems. We need more electric buses, for example, because 75% of all of those bars is coming from the commercial sector, not the residents. So I think, yes, the heat pumps and the EVs and the e-bikes and the mowers and all of that are helping. I think this would be worse without them, but they're not contributing significantly enough that they really sort of show up in the data.
Especially if you're talking about industrial profile, industrial usage
Mhm.
profiles. Yeah.
Right. Like, for example, one of the projects we're excited about, Rhino, is going to expand here in Burlington. And I think they're doing an expansion in Burlington that will allow them to stop trucking product from here to Williston or from Williston to here. So we'll be providing a Tier 3 electrification incentive for that, because they're going to be reducing fossil fuel use because they won't be running trucks from here to Williston. But that will help. James, you want to add in something?
Yeah, you clarified that well. They're going to add extra refrigeration in Burlington and avoid the trucking to the refrigeration that's in Williston. So it's a Tier 3 measure, and it is also a load growth measure for Burlington. So it's one of those really great deals, and I certainly want to compliment the energy services folks and my team for working with them to turn that into an approved Tier 3 or to approvable Tier 3 measure. So it's a great one. But I think Emily also said it. I mean, we know EV charging is occurring. There's no question that there is load related to EV charging. But what we can also see is that our aggregate load has not yet increased because of it, in any meaningful amount. So it's a real issue. And again, it creates a length of energy that we would not normally hold.
All right, thanks, James.
The head of GMT is going around and telling people, he's going through all the different municipalities, and they're talking about them getting more electric buses
Mhm.
and possibly the need to upgrade their facilities and transformers, like on a pretty large scale of.
Yeah, we're working with them
how-
as well.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that'll be great. Okay, so this is the same slide, only this is dollars, right? Before was megawatt hours, now here's the revenue. So you can see the first, and this is only 10 years or 14 years of data, the other one was 22 years. So you can see from FY10 to 2021, the pattern is fairly similar, and those are the 12 years of no rate increases, right? So dollar per kilowatt hour remains the same, kilowatt hours fluctuate and generally trend downward. And the big difference are the 3 rate increases that we have requested and or gotten approved in FY 22, 23, and 24. That's what's causing the revenue dollars to rise here. These are rec sale, oops, no, wrong screen, sorry. These are rec sales from same period, FY10 to FY24. So you can see some volatility there. This is what allowed BED to not seek rate increases during that 12-year period, largely, right? Was a big factor in it, I would say, because the rec prices at that time were really high, and that additional revenue kind of made up for what was eroding on the sales side. You can see things have stabilized really since FY19. FY24 was a little bit higher than the sort of low in 20. Anyway, the budgeted amount was higher. Probably the actual is going to be closer to 22 or 23, really. Okay, so now we're going to move to operating expense. So this kind of, I think, gets to your question, Commissioner Whitaker, right, which is where's the risk and how can we be, $2 million ahead, but you're telling me we're going to be $1 million behind. So proportionally of our entire operating expense budget, you can see that the right-hand side, fuel, purchase power, and transmission, right, that's half the pie. So O&M is big, and it's great that we're ahead of budget on that, but you have to have a lot of O&M savings, to make up for big variations in fuel, purchase power, and transmission. So that's kind of the ratios we're dealing with for those expense categories. Depreciation and amortization is 10%. That's the sort of tealish robin's egg blue. That's non-cash, right? That's just income statement expense. The taxes and pilot are about 5%. And then I did a comparison here on this slide, which is sort of what did our operating expense budget look like in FY10 versus what does it look like today? So fuel is about the same, interestingly, 14%. Purchase power has shrunk quite a bit. It used to be 38% back in FY10, now it's 22%. Transmission has gone up a lot, and we'll see that. I actually have a bar chart on transmission. And then O&M has grown. Depreciation, taxes, pretty much the same. Okay. So here's fuel expense over the past 14 years. Let's see if I have any note on this one. So this is a function, as you know, of both the wood price per ton, but it's also a function of the volume consumed or used at McNeil, right? So there's some price delta, and then there's some volume delta as well. So a lot of the, like FY19 being low, that was both a low volume and a low price yield.
Pay more per unit when you buy less? Is it a bulk discount, or is it, why does volume impact?
Well, so if the plant runs more than usual or less than usual, right? I see. So So we pay for the wood when it's purchased or delivered, but then we put it in inventory. And so we don't actually expense the wood until the
Okay.
plant
I
uses
see.
it. So the purchasing is sort of independent of the usage, right? So, because we use an inventory system. So FY19, which is a low, was both a low, relatively low production year as well as a low, we were paying low prices per ton that year. So here is purchase power expense over the years. So it's, what I love about this one is that, we became 100% renewable and look where our power costs are, right? They're better than in FY10. This isn't normalized for inflation or anything or adjusted. This is just straight.
So it's probably even better.
It's probably, exactly, it is even better. Let me move to, so here's transmission. This one is ugly, right? This is why that slice of the pie changed so much. So we were paying just over $4 million a year in transmission expense back in FY10. We're now paying not quite 10 million, but 9 and change. So it's definitely more than doubled over that period. So that's definitely a source of challenge.
So is that what we pay ISO New England?
Combination of ISO New England, Velco, and NIPA.
For the movement of the energy across the grid?
It's just that transmission expense is the most complicated area, I
Okay.
would say, of the power supply budget. James is
And-
here
and-
for questions.
Yeah, and and Green Mountain Power too. So we pay Green Mountain Power Transmission for accessing the Georgia Mountain Community Wind, which is internal to their system. And we pay transmission for wheeling power to the airport across their distribution system. So Georgia Mountain Wind is a 10 megawatt firm point-to-point transmission contract because we don't know when it'll produce. So we need 10 megawatts of transmission all the time. The airport is a load following transmission contract because it's purely related to the load at the airport.
Okay. So
But
it's
the-
And
basically
yeah,
10%.
the number of different ways we incur these charges is, as Emily said, complicated. I would use my favorite word, perhaps even gruesome, in terms of detail. Happy to do it in more detail, but it's not a nighttime quick discussion,
No.
I'm afraid.
I mean, I think I understand. You're paying to use the infrastructure essentially.
Yeah, and most of this is, like
Enough.
James says, we do pay GMP, we do pay some for NIPA, but most of this is going to Velco and ISO New England for New England-wide, statewide transmission facilities.
So, call this a naive question, but like, how does that square against all this money we've been investing in Velco all these years? And every year we put a lot of investment into their system.
And we receive a dividend payment for that equity. So it's essentially like owning stock, right? So it's a attractive rate of return, almost 10%. So that's why we make the equity investment. But I wouldn't say that those two things are like necessarily related. Yeah.
Okay, I just don't know if.
I mean,
I mean,
One cancels the
well,
other
I
out,
guess,
or.
no, they don't really cancel each other out. It's, as James and I was saying, like, there's a very complicated formula for how transmission expense is allocated among the distribution utilities as well as the other New England transmission operators like
Thank you for coming
Velco.
tonight, man.
So
Appreciate it.
there's
and as Emily said too, I mean, just to give you a sense of scale, the ISO transmission is probably 8 million, give or take, right? 7 to 8. Velco 1 to 2, and then you fall off hard when you get to like GMP and NIPA in terms of magnitude.
Right.
So,
but the amount,
it is, ISO is the gorilla for transmission still.
right, but the amount we pay to ISO, some of that ultimately flows back to Velco to pay for them as an operator and owner of New England transmission facilities, right? So it's we pay into a New England pool, and then that New England pool gets divvied up, and Velco gets a share. Yeah.
We pay a tariff rate for ISO transmission, and we pay what's essentially an allocated rate for Velco to make whole all of Velco's costs after they get money from ISO New England. So one of them is a rate, X times your peak load, and the other is percentage of whatever Velco's operating costs are for the month after other revenues.
Fair enough.
Okay, so what I did on this slide was I took the previous pie chart, which is sort of the little one shown up in the right-hand corner, of all of our operating expenses, and I took the purple slice, which is the O&M, and I exploded that and said, okay, what are all the things within that purple O&M? And the big blue one is labor and salaries, not surprisingly. The second biggest red one is labor overhead, benefits and pension. And then the green one is outside services, consulting engineers, folks who come in to adjust the environmental emissions controls at the McNeil plant, consultants, and all that stuff. DSM rebates, that's the return on the that's the other side of the EEU reimbursement that I mentioned, 7%. And then you get into a whole lots of little things, stock room, materials and supplies, maintenance contracts for things like software, Tier 3 compliance, that's the expense portion of meeting our Tier 3 obligation every year, insurance, and then everything else from, phones to postage is too small to see. And so what I spoke with the staff, right, which is to sort of say, half of that operating expense pie chart is power supply, and then of that 34%, that is operating and maintenance, sort of within our control, 57% of that is us, is employees and is our people. And then this is the change over time of O&M expense. Let me see, do I have a note? What happened in 14-15? Oh, I think 14-15 was probably, there was a staff retirement buyout around that period. I'm guessing that's what caused the rather precipitous drop from FY 15 to 16. So, not surprisingly, with labor and inflation, benefits increases, those costs have gone up. This is a slide that we show you every year, and we also show the council this. And so this shows sort of our efforts around fiscal discipline and trying to moderate the rate of growth in sort of the amount of the non-power supply O&M expenses that we can actually control. So in FY24, those expenses were 1.5% less than they were in the FY23 budget. The rate of growth on average is just under 4% a year. Since FY16, between FY7 and FY16, the rate of growth was more like 5.84%. So we've been really trying as hard as we can to keep that growth limited. So as I told the staff, okay, now you know how to get to your operating income. We've covered operating revenues. Now we've covered operating expense. So that's the top piece of the income statement that I show you every month. And then there's sort of all the other non-operating below the line items. Velco dividends are the first one. We just talked about that. That's $4.4 million in the FY24 budget. Interest income, which, has been higher the past couple years with higher interest rates. Grants and capital contributions to customer construction projects. That one is very, very volatile. Depends on what projects are being done, depends on what grants we receive. Other income net is kind of everything else miscellaneous. And then you have your interest expense. That's our debt service, the payment on the mortgage, so to speak. And then you get to your bottom line net income. I won't really go through this, I don't think. We do a cash flow statement. You see that every year in the budget packet. We essentially look at, for our operating revenues, you know, what are our sources of cash? You can see, so operating revenues is the big one, the Velco dividends, the interest, the grant income, I just covered those. Here's our $3 million general obligation bond financing. Here's the amount we budgeted to draw down this year from the revenue bond. You add that all up, you get $87 million. And then on the other side, we say, okay, where's the cash going to go? Operating expenses, taxes, the capital projects, the debt service, et cetera. And we cash flow out. This is the annual picture, but we also do a cash flow for every month to see where we're budgeting to be. So this is just proportionally showing those uses of cash. So again, the operating revenues are the really big one. You can see the importance of the 2022 revenue bond in the orange, $9 million in our budget this year. Velco equity is the red at 5%. And then proportionally, the uses of cash, again, the operating expenses, not surprisingly, the big one. Debt service is the maroon, 12%. Capital projects for what we call BED, or the distribution system, non-McNeil, right, is 13%, and McNeil is 2%. And then we show you this slide every year. It's part of our budget presentation, just sort of showing the allocation, sort of capital spending over time, as well as the allocation of the capital budget to the different plants. So production is our generating resources, distribution is the distribution system, general includes IT, buildings, fleet vehicles, that sort of thing. And I think that's really what I kind of had. I wanted to give you some just context for proportion and scale and relative size and importance of things, as well as sort of trends over time, you know, so to just understand kind of what the pain points are, you know, AKA transmission being a big one. And then I also wanted to share, so we're actively sort of in budget season, so to speak, right now. The departments, the various areas of BD are developing their operating budgets, their capital budgets. Everyone's working on their worksheets and sending in their forms. And then we'll spend, you know, the next 2 months really like putting everything together, seeing how things total up, figuring out where we have to make adjustments before we bring you a budget as a first pass at your April meeting typically. At the same time, we'll be developing our cost of service model for a potential 2024 FY25 rate increase. And so we'll need that to say, okay, what rate increase does our cost of service show that we can justify? And then what is our budgeted amount that we'll be requesting to make sure that those two are not in conflict with each other. I did want to share with you, we also do I didn't stop sharing. Typically, as part of our annual review by Moody's, they ask us to provide pro forma financials. So they look at our most kind of recent audited financials. Then they want to see where are you projecting to be in the fiscal year that's either in progress or that you're in the middle of preparing financial statements for. And then what are you forecasting out 2 or 3 years? So I have no idea how close our actual FY25 budget will be to this projection, since we're still putting it together literally. But just to let you know, we do this exercise. We do provide this to Moody's. Typically, they've asked every year. Some years, I think 1 year they didn't ask. We maybe got lucky. But we do always have a 5-year projection that we're actively working on and updating to do planning. And so this is the pro forma that we shared with Moody's in September. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong tab. I wanted to be on the income statement. So here you can see we had FY22 results at this time. We had preliminary results for FY23. We had a budget for FY24. And then we had a couple years where we were forecasting. So we had to put in some assumptions here for how much sales would grow, about $9 million between preliminary FY23 and the forecast for 26. Some of that, it was projections for rate increases, which you'll see below. Rec revenue increasing modestly to 8.9 million, similar range as past results. Let's see. Fuel expense, we forecast to grow a bit. Purchase power also. Some of that was due to, some of our contracts are gonna start to expire. And that's another thing that James and I will be updating you over the next 6 months or so, I would say. And so, this forecast had to make some assumptions about the relative price of the contracts that would replace what we have in right now. Transmissions are projected to grow. O&M, we assumed a rate of inflation. So I think the important thing is to kind of see what we're trying to do with this exercise is come out with, decent credit rating metrics and decent operating and net income results. And so we've made our days cash on hand target here. We've got the adjusted debt service coverage ratio around 1.1 to 1.2. And then here we showed Moody's the assumed rate increases, right, that would be required to sort of make this pro forma happen. We've got the 2 rate increases that are approved. We've got the 5.5 that's currently under review. And then for FY25, we assumed a 5.4%. And for FY26, we assumed a 3.6. So again,
Those are just assumptions.
Just assumptions.
They may come in higher or lower. They're
Exactly.
just assumptions.
But I thought it'd be helpful to kind of give you a range of what was sort of working on paper back in September. And I think that's all I had on this agenda item, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that electricity is still so cheap, honestly. Right? I mean, it's you gotta pay for a lot of stuff, and it's a lot of infrastructure and a lot of costs and transactions that go from generating to turning your light switch on, and it's still pretty affordable. I think that makes the 5% probably reasonable, right? Because it's low, relatively low anyways.
Yeah.
A little bit, just not seeing, especially looking at what you just talked about the next couple of years, guesses. Just feels like that goal is still a bit out with the goal that Dare expressed at least a couple of years ago about trying to get it down to that 1.5%, 2% to get through that threshold that I'm not sure where that stands with the PUC as far as being not having to go to them for more
The
routine
renewable
rate.
bill would raise that from 2 to 3%, recognizing that very few utilities are getting 2% rate changes these days. So if it was at 3% and we were looking at a 3.5%, you'd be in the spot where maybe you could get it done in fiscal '26. I don't foresee it in fiscal '25. But remember, point Emily was making, the sales come up, your rate pressure goes down, all things equal. And we haven't seen the sales go up. If the sales start coming, the pressure to raise rates really dissipates significantly. So we get the town center online, the first phase of that project. We get the high school online, we get productive reuse of some of these commercial facilities. That will change the sales piece. Ironically, more than doing 1,000 heat pumps on residential will do, even though that's a good accomplishment too. And doing those things in tandem will have an impact. So, that's what we're waiting for to get to that trajectory. And we've seen some delay in some of the different commercial activity in the city. So.
Okay, that was in perspective. Any other questions from commissioners?
No?
All right, thank you, Emily. That was very informative. All right, we'll move on to item number 8 on our agenda tonight, which is the miscellaneous fee update.
Okay. Fortunately, you don't get a new speaker for this one, I apologize. But I'll try to keep this brief. So this is a similar slide deck to what I took you through last month. I'm just sort of highlighting the additional work and analysis that's taken place since your last meeting. So as I said then, we're evaluating our miscellaneous service fees. These fees are assessed under a tariff. The tariff will require both City Council and PUC approval. The current fees that we have in place now went into effect on July 1st, 2010. They were based on costs from FY09. And FY 2009, that cost basis was before we deployed our advanced metering AMI infrastructure. So since the last meeting, the changes are in yellow. The labor rates actually were FY24 in the calculation. I had just mislabeled the slide. So, and the labor overhead rate was or is FY23 actual. Just clarifying that. As requested, we did look at the ratio of initial service fees performed for customers wholly new to Burlington, where we got to start from the beginning with your name and address and all of the information we collect to set up an account, versus customers who are either landlords with standing orders or customers just moving house to house, apartment to apartment within the service territory, or they moved out of town and now they're moving back and they're still in our system. So the breakdown was almost 50-50. 46% in 2023 were new customers, brand new customers, and 54% were of initial service setups were returning customers. We also dug in harder on depreciation for AMI-related assets, meters, servers, softwares, pole-mounted routers, switches, so that we refined the carrying cost that's associated with the AMI, or with fees that use the AMI, which is essentially the reconnection fee. And we also sent our worksheet to the Vermont Department of Public Service, both the sort of finance division that will be ultimately reviewing the rates from a rate design, just and reasonable standard perspective, as well as the Consumer Affairs and Protection division. And we received favorable comments back from both of those departments of the Public Service Department. Okay. So I have, does anyone need a hard copy of this so you can see it better? Are you all on Teams?
Right in front of us.
Great. So this is kind of where.
Do you have a copy of this?
This is where we stand right now. These are the fees as they were posted on our website for customer feedback and review. We are now proposing, different than last month, that we split the initial service fee into two, depending on whether you're a returning customer or a new. So the returning customer initial service fee would drop from $30 now to proposal to be $6. That would apply to returning customers, including standing orders. And then the new customer fee for someone new to our service territory would drop from $30 to $15. The after hours rate is unchanged since last time because the additional time it takes to set up a new customer is sort of dwarfed by the minimum call time that gets incurred if someone needs to respond after hours. Okay, for reconnection, this is where the additional analysis we did on the AMI comes into play. I'm forgetting what we had as a proposal last time, but it's currently $20 The current cost basis indicates a fee of $26. We would be proposing to charge this fee not only to customers who have been disconnected for non-payment, but to any customer who's asking to have service restored after a disconnect for any purpose. If a customer is moving in to a unit or a house apartment and they also need the power turned on, we would charge this fee, not the initial service fee. Like, we wouldn't charge both, in other words. Okay? Does that make sense? We'd just charge the reconnect fee.
Can I ask a quick question before we move on from reconnection? And sorry, I wasn't here last month, so, and don't remember from the notes, but if, have you overlaid the reconnection, the population who might look for reconnection with like low, moderate income rate? Is there some, is that separate, different, or is there kind of an overlay there? Or ones we've looked at that?
We haven't, so something we can look at. So in other words,
If you're on that special rate,
right,
is there an opportunity to pay attention to what that
we
$20
could
would do to-
analyze the customers who are on the EAP rate versus customers who are being assessed the reconnection fee, and to see
the budget
how
impact?
much correlation there is. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it sort of feels like a poverty tax, right? And so, whereas if I just let it lapse, I only have to pay $6, but if I don't have enough money, I have to pay 26.
So just,
No, we would,
So, or if I move, for example, I only pay 6.
correct.
But if I actually don't have enough money and I leave, which I understand, you guys give people a lot of breaks, right? Or it takes a while to be disconnected.
It does.
I did get one of those notes the other day.
Uh-oh.
Already.
You get the rating one?
Yeah.
they're separating out, to understand if it's someone who potentially could afford and is being
Delinquent, yeah.
versus folks who are on this rate, special rate that may,
Mm-hmm.
this might put them over the edge in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they pay the 6 or something like that, yeah. But, because I think the problem with the special rate is it's only, not that many people are using it.
Fair, right? That was a topic a couple months ago, right?
Right.
Like the traditional, kind of utility regulatory paradigm is cost, causer pays. So you try to have the fee really just reflect the cost of service. So if somebody or some entity is incurring a cost, they're paying for the cost, and it doesn't get distributed to the other ratepayers. Within that, you can do, analysis, make judgments, do other things. But
Yeah.
I think this kind of reflects that paradigm to start
Mhm.
with, but it's a good overlay to have, and we can definitely look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's fair. It'd just be to understand the
Mhm.
burden just upfront if there's, and then maybe there's creativity around what could happen.
Well, I don't know, Mike, if you know this top of your head, but if somebody was disconnected for non-payment and they had entered into a budget payment plan, whether their reconnect fee goes into the budget payment plan.
Oh, that's interesting.
And if not, we can look into that.
I'll look into that.
Okay, because typically when we do have a disconnect for non-payment, and if there is a balance, we work to try to set up a kind of a repayment over time, and it's possible that this kind of thing could be included in that as opposed to having to be paid up front. So there's different ways to look
Yeah,
at it, but
yeah.
let's see if that's our, kind of within our current practice. Yep.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, continuing down, reconnection after hours would drop, actually, because again, so the reconnect fee, the cost basis for that back in FY09 was $31.41. It was a policy decision to only charge $20 instead of the full cost recovery for that. So it would go up, but the cost of it actually has fallen by $5.72 due to the AMI, okay? Whereas reconnection after hours there was no sort of policy-driven adjustment to that. It was sort of priced at cost, so to speak, at $195. That would drop to $93 again because of the AMI and the ability to disconnect or reconnect remotely. Temporary service, this is as presented to you last month. Cost basis difference between, increasing between 537 up to now it is $840, so the proposal would be an $841 fee. I'll flip to the next one, returned checks. This one, the cost basis has increased to $17.58. The proposed fee, the $27.20, proposed fee is $28. The proposal is to charge that not only for checks, but also for ACH or electronic payments returned for insufficient funds.
Emily, can I add something just real quick? Lightning fast work by Mike. We can confirm that the reconnect is built into the budget payment plan.
That's good.
But we could still do the overlay that you were requesting, but it's quick work.
Well done.
Credit to Andy Higby, who's watching from afar.
Thank you, Andy.
Good teamwork.
Meter removal replacement for siding, no change since your last meeting. The proposal there is $136. For collections, we are recommending to eliminate this fee. This is, I don't know if we actually, I don't know how many situations this actually happens anymore. It was set up for, if you are a person who received a disconnect notice, under current regulation, we have to visit your home. If we happened to visit your home and you were home and you had funds available to pay us at that time, in order to restore service, we would charge you this this $20 collection fee. We're recommending to just eliminate that.
Yeah.
And then the last two, customer assistance call. You'll see we got probably the most feedback on this one. The price of this the cost of this is increased quite a bit. It's $28 now. It would be $86 under the current cost basis. $472 if after hours. The label on this implies that we will charge you $86 every time you call and ask us for help or report a problem. What this really is it's a fee for one of our distribution crew members to come to your location to investigate a reported problem with your power or electric service after having tried to troubleshoot the problem with you by phone, and explaining the fee, saying, we'll be happy to send someone out, but if the problem turns out to be on your equipment or your side and not a BED issue, we will be charging you X dollars. And what I've heard from dispatch is that if someone's calling after hours, and even now they learn they're going to be charged $195, they say, okay, thank you, it's fine to send someone in the morning, right? So it's not for any customer service call. It's really for a location site visit. And if we get out to the site or the location and we determine that the problem is with BED's equipment, there is no charge.
So we're going to relabel that.
Yeah, we're going
just
to
be more accurate.
call it site visit or location visit upon customer request, or something that's more descriptive of what the service actually is.
So what would be the customer's equipment and what would,
A breaker has flipped and
something inside the house, like in
yeah.
that box?
Where you would hire an electrician to come and do it. If they'd be calling and saying, hey, I think something's wrong with your service, and we say, okay, we roll a truck, and we roll a truck, we have to pay a 3-hour minimum call, IBEW rates, right?
Yeah.
And so after hours, assuming it's after hours. So then if we come and to find out, there's a problem, on your electric panel or so it's not on the BED system, that's when this would apply.
Okay.
If it was related to the service connecting to the house, our problem, we cover that.
So what happens if we have an outage and the surge comes back on and trips a bunch of breakers in their homes, their main breaker? How are we gonna determine if that was our fault or their fault? Only reason I'm saying, because I've lived that experience where I've had 13 calls in one night for that reason. So, is it gonna be the person called in determining that and saying,
Based
gonna
on what
be?
I've heard is that either the operations team during business hours or the dispatcher after hours will try to run through those situations with the customer, right? And so the first thing we'll say is, have you checked your breakers? And obviously the dispatcher might know, hey, we had an outage and your service has just come back on. Could you go check your box and see, right? And so they do take the time to try to work through that with the customer. And often that does the trick. And then again, so if the customer is insistent or really feels like it's a problem with our service, the person speaking with them always informs them of what the fee would be if, depending on if it's business hours or after hours, if they really want someone to come out.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, you want me to expand on that?
I didn't know if you intended
Yeah,
to.
and just in general, so
Yep.
from our operating guidelines,
Hey, Paul, could you-
PUC approved in 1990. How much time do I have?
Just want to hear you on the mic, that's all.
Look what you did.
So it's a great question. In
Take that
general,
question back.
yeah, no. In general, utility like ourselves and all utilities really work by the same general guidelines. Unless we're negligent, we wouldn't pay in that scenario. So, and the PUC that's in our operating guidelines from 1997, it's pretty crystal clear. So, we say but even if we had an outage that wasn't our fault and we reset and something goes on in your house, we would not reimburse for that claim. So.
I mean, it's not so much that the equipment has failed, due to our end of it. It's just the customer service part of it, of being there for the customer and helping them out, because we do have a lot of customers I know at the time were elderly, could not go reset their breakers, due to it. And it did go out because of the outage, not, like I said, it didn't damage their equipment, it just tripped out, and it does happen. That's kind of what my question was about.
Okay, so that's the current proposal. As I said, those, the fees, the current and proposed fees are listed on our website and have been for a couple weeks now. We've heard, our communications team has sort of put the word out about the proposed fees through North Avenue News, Front Porch Forum, social media, I believe. We've heard from 17 folks. All but one of these are Front Porch Forum readers. 9 of the customers expressed that the customer assistance fee seemed really high, and/or they asked questions about, am I going to get charged this to report a tree branch, or it seems like you should be able to answer basic customer service calls without, charging me hundreds of dollars, and so that's where we're like, that label is not very clear. 8 customers expressed a similar concern as the commission just raised. The reconnect fee and/or the bad check fee seems harmful to customers who can least afford those assessments. 2 customers expressed that the temporary service fee seemed high. They also, it seemed, maybe weren't clear about when this fee would or wouldn't be charged. One person expressed that this fee would be charged if they wanted to do a panel upgrade. That's not what it's about. It's temporary service is really kind of a vacant lot construction site, and we kind of put in basic service while the construction crew does their work. 3 customers expressed that something to the effect of, seems very reasonable, glad you're updating fees to stay current with current costs. And 1 customer just said we shouldn't charge any fees at all. And I've also updated the revenue impact, because we've adjusted some fees, we've split the initial service fee apart. So with the current proposal, this would result, I estimate, in a $120,000 decrease in miscellaneous revenues. Most of that, the loss of revenue from the initial service fee. It'll be a little bit offset by the increases in the other fees, but the volume of those is very low comparatively. So net, overall, this would be a decrease in operating revenue of around $110,000 to $115,000. We have done some additional work on the conduit rental fee. That will go up, but not by very much. So that will maybe result in about $1,200 additional revenue per year. So it won't make up for this shortfall.
So like all things equal, FY '25, that's more rate pressure, less fee collection, just to be transparent. It's not insurmountable, we'll deal with it,
It's a
but
tiny amount.
Not a
It's
ton of
just
money, but
important
not
to
insignificant either.
mention
Yeah.
that.
Well, but $65 million budget, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, every 1% rate increase is about $500,000 of revenue or expense. So you can kind of
Okay, that's a,
translate
So
that
there's
to.
2/10 of a point
Right.
roughly.
Right.
That's all.
all right, that's good to know.
So that's all I had. I did have Scott a little bit on just a reminder of the Vermont, this is a busy comparison, so I can go through it or not because Commissioner Moody, you sent me that email, so
just one,
as you wish, I'm ready, but maybe I'll pause there and take questions.
question.
I'm,
Yeah.
yeah, almost.
That comparison will be included in the package after the fact for us to just take a quick glance at.
Yeah, I can
If we can
give you a hard
provide
copy
it.
right
Oh.
now.
It's not a
Thank you.
true.
And
there-
just know it's not apples to apples.
Yeah, I was
gonna
Everyone's
say.
got,
Of course. Appreciate that.
Like some things we charge for get charged differently at different utilities, or some things may be built into operating where we're charging a fee, or
Yeah.
they might charge a time and materials where we have a set fee, so there's distinctions.
Or less bundled
Like along the
together
way.
and, yeah.
Yeah.
That-
Right,
totally
and,
fair.
and, you know, we all have different union contracts with different provisions, we all have different labor rates, we all have different labor overhead and benefit rates, we all have different truck and vehicle rates. Our service territory is very small and compact, you know, the cooperatives and GMP cover, you know, vast expanses of territory compared to little Burlington. So, you know, all of these are, in theory, right, they're cost-based. And so because the utilities have different cost structures, it can be hard to compare
Totally.
completely apples to apples.
Other questions? Spirkies, I would love to give you a chance to comment if you'd like.
Thank you very much. Pardon me, Alan Bierke. For the record, I'm not the one customer that said no fees whatsoever at all. I just want to confirm that wasn't me, right? So, again, I really appreciate that you folks are seriously looking at these fees, and particularly in light of the smart meters, reducing the fees to transfer power on and off. As a landlord that has standing orders for all of my units, I think that it's very important to recognize, and I think we talked about this at the last time, although Emily didn't think that she was breaking out standing orders in addition to customers moving into the territory as opposed to somebody moving from one apartment to the other. But I think that the cost to do a standing order is significantly less than answering a telephone call and talking to somebody about moving service from one to another. I also think that electrification is very important, and it should be a goal and something that you support, because you have in the past had certain things where the cost basis does not equate to the fee, and the reason was that you made a policy decision to do that. So electrification between tenants, you know, when a tenant moves out and another tenant isn't moved in yet, it keeps the smoke detectors on. It keeps security lighting that's outside. Maybe it's a duplex and the security light is tied to one person's account, but the other tenant gets the benefit of it. Having the lights on if the police or the fire department needs to come is also very, very important. So the impact, I think, is small, and we don't know because we don't actually have the proportion broken out of how many people are transferring pursuant to a standing order as opposed to moving from one place to another. Those are grouped together. But I think you should encourage standing orders, and I think you should encourage them for those reasons when an apartment is vacant. Also, to the point of somebody that is having trouble paying their bills, if it's a tenant, if my tenant can't pay, I don't want the power turned off. So it helps them afford to keep the heat on, keep the lights on, keep the stove working, and things like that. So there is a public benefit to electrification, and standing order makes it as cheap and easy as possible for you. So I would encourage you to continue to look at that, but once again, I'm loving $6 better than 30. And I think, and I've shared with Emily, how she might be able to recoup some of that money, and it has to do with the return check fee. This is not my fight, but as serving on the Commerce Committee in the House of Representatives for terms working on banking, I have provided Emily, as well as to the clerk of the board, a copy of a statute that very few people know about. And the statute specifically says that if you deposit a check into your checking account, and that check is returned by the customer's bank as insufficient funds, your bank cannot charge you any fee. And very few people know about it. Some of the banks don't really know about it when you bring it up to them. I was in a business that dealt with some return checks, and when you bring it up to them, the banks go, "Oh, we won't charge you that fee anymore." My understanding, it's built into the, some component of that is built into the return check charge. So maybe you want to adjust there, but I'm not here to say that the return check fee should be changed from what is being proposed. I just hope I never have to pay it. But checks do get returned for other reasons. If they're drawn on a closed account, you have to pay the fee. If it's not signed by somebody authorized to sign, you have to pay the fee. So it's not all of your return check charges are based on insufficient funds. But again, I really appreciate you folks taking the time to work on this. And I will appreciate whichever outcome you come up with. But if you can manage to make the cost for transferring pursuant to a standing order 0 or less, I'd appreciate it.
So you're saying that, can you explain the return check fee? So if I have a bank account and you write a bad check and cash my bank account, I don't have to pay the fee?
If I write you a check that
Yeah.
has insufficient funds to pay the check, and you try to deposit it into your bank, and they take it back out of your account and say, sorry, that was returned for insufficient funds, my bank can charge me for trying to write that check. Your bank cannot charge you for trying to
Accept.
deposit that check.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but is that, yeah, I mean, we can see if that's.
Some of the checks that you get are getting returned to you presumably are for insufficient funds. I am mentioning to you that not all of them are. So if somebody writes a check on a closed account,
Right, that's not insufficient funds, that's the problem. Right, fair enough. Okay, got it.
Thank you very much.
And we appreciate your.
wonderful spending Valentine's Day with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say we appreciate you and the part you played in bringing this to the forefront and bringing about some of the changes that need to be made. So we appreciate you too.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Last agenda item, Commissioners' check-in, which is sort of any last comments or whatever on what we spoke about this evening or whatever's on your mind.
I was having a quick one. Minnie, do you know where the light pole thing, like, are there any streets? Has that been decided yet, or is that part of the budgeting? We're gonna change the light on
I
any
don't believe
street?
there is any street lighting upgrade in this fiscal year.
And so fiscal 20,
Yeah, we still work on the budget right now.
okay, so you'll know
Yes.
maybe in
Yeah, once
April? Okay.
You're asking like what neighborhoods might be targeted for
fiscal year 25.
For upgrades?
for upgrades, and maybe they should be talked to way ahead of time and all that. Any other commissioner comments?
No.
Alrighty, then, that being said, I would take a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, do I have a second?
Second?
Motion and seconded, discussion on the motion. Hearing none, all in favor of adjournment, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All 5 ayes, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.